A story becomes perfect because you take your experiences or your perspective, your thoughts, and you make it perfect for that audience each time you're telling it. Stories are the way we are connecting and having basic units of understanding. We are connecting through emotion, we are connecting through experiences, we're learning. And it's just a so much more dynamic way to communicate than just talking at people. It's not a fluffy skill. It's a skill that's critical going forward to be able to navigate work and life.
Hey, Creating Maven. I'm Joy Spencer, your reframe specialist, with one important message. Your real work, it's not your job or your career. Your real work is what you create. And what you create is what sets you apart and makes you incomparable. It's your legacy. I'm here to show you a whole new way of working so you can create with your gifts, make a unique contribution, and finally get paid to be yourself. This is Reframe to Create.
Do you feel like you don't have a story to tell, or even if you do, that there's no way that you know how to tell it well? Has this made you shy about wrapping your arms around this work of storytelling? Well, my guest, Karen Eber, is going to walk you through to the other side of that feeling and so many other storytelling hangups that are common among professionals and entrepreneurs. Trust me, I know, and I see this all the time. I work with a lot of leaders to help them unearth and craft their stories and talks, and they often start out feeling stuck about if and what story they can tell. I ran across Karen's TED Talk, How Your Brain Responds to Stories and Why They're Crucial for Leaders, because I was looking for something impactful to share with some of the leaders that I work with. And Karen did not disappoint. If you haven't checked out this TED Talk, you should, because it's got powerful and very insightful tips about the how and why of effective storytelling. I've been following her on LinkedIn ever since I saw that talk. And when I saw that she was about to release a new book called The Perfect Story, How to Tell Stories That Inform, Influence, and Inspire, I knew I needed to get my hands on a copy, so I ordered it and got it. But I also thought, hey, why keep her to myself? I thought about you and the great value you'd get out of hearing from a master storyteller and storytelling expert like Karen. She is the real deal. She's not just a TED Talk speaker and an author, but a leadership consultant and keynote speaker as well. And as the CEO and chief storyteller of Eber Leadership Group, she helps Fortune 500 companies like GE and Microsoft to build leaders, teams, and culture, one story at a time. She guest lectures at universities, including MIT and Stanford. She's a former head of culture, learning, and leadership development at GE and Deloitte, and is a frequent contributor to Fast Company, Quartz, MSN, Entrepreneur, and Business Insider. She's got all the receipts, y'all. She's got all the receipts for our conversation about storytelling and really digging into why it's an important and critical skill for you in life and in work. We got right into it. Why do you think learning how to tell a story, and specifically to the title of your book, A Perfect Story, is so important?
The title, The Perfect Story, is a bit of a play on words because there really is no such thing as the perfect story that's sitting around waiting for you to pick it up and tell it. A story becomes perfect because you take your experiences or your perspective, your thoughts, and you make it perfect for that audience each time you're telling it. Stories are the way we are connecting and having basic units of understanding. We are connecting through emotion. We are connecting through experiences. We're learning. And it's just a so much more dynamic way to communicate than just talking at people. It's not a fluffy skill. It's a skill that's critical going forward to be able to navigate work and life.
So what about people who feel like they don't have a story to tell? Or I hear this a lot. My life's not that interesting. I haven't had a lot of problems or challenges. It's been pretty good and humdrum. How can I tell stories, or can I tell stories?
When people feel like I don't have a story to tell or I don't have anything interesting to share, they have unfortunately seen maybe someone tell a story what seems like in an effortless way. Maybe, it's someone like a TED speaker, or you see someone give a keynote, or just in life, someone seems to have a gift for words and they package it in this beautiful story. And you're like, how did they do that? I didn't get that gene. Why didn't they hand it to me? But what they don't see is all the work that went into that, all of the reps and learning how to communicate and tell a story and figure out your own personal piece to it. When people say to me, I can't tell stories, or I don't have anything interesting to say, I always put the word yet there, because it's like any skill. Sure, you can't do it because no one's broken it down for you in a way that you recognize how to tap into ideas that you have, that you see that you are full of so many fascinating tidbits and stories and nuggets that someone is going to connect with. And when someone breaks that down for you, you begin to follow steps and figure out your own patterns and figure out what comes naturally to you. And you become a storyteller and you start forming your perfect stories. It's this misguided conception, that preconceived notion that we, you know, you either have this gene and ability to do it or you don't. And that's just not true at all.
Well, I hope you're going to break it down for us a little bit today as we chat and we talk more about story and storytelling. But before we get to that, how did you come to this yourself? What's your journey been to what you're saying here about knowing that stories are so important? Everyone has a story to tell, that it can be broken down in a way that we can all learn and have access to it. How did you come to this?
I have a two-part answer to that, because one is an experience that happened to me personally, and the other is, once I had that experience, how did I use it professionally? Personally, I was born with two different colored eyes, or shortly after I was born, they turned two different colors. One is brown and one is green. And I love this. Anytime someone says, tell us something interesting about yourself, I'm like, got it. No problem. I don't have to think of something. But as much as I loved this, I recognized pretty quickly most people didn't know what to make of it. They still don't. You can tell the exact moment in a conversation when someone notices, because their eyes start going back and forth between mine, and you can almost see their brain trying to decide, like, do we look at the brown one or the green one? Oh, the brown one or the green one? They will then, their words will slow and they'll stop mid-sentence, and they will almost always do some version of, did you know you have two different color eyes? Sometimes I can't help it. I will respond with, no, you're kidding. But this was the moment where everything changed, because now they're calling people over and 10 heads are now trying to cram and see my eyes. And I'm no longer a person. I'm a sideshow that is weird and can't be put into a category. It doesn't make sense to people. And they start drilling me with questions of, what color eyes do your parents have? And do you see different colors out of each eye? Or my favorite, do your eyes give you special powers?
Wouldn't that be nice?
Right? And I always want to be like, do your eyes give you special powers? So this happened so many times that I started to feel like it was a burden, because this is this thing that I loved, but now it was this really awkward situation that I never knew how to navigate. And I one day told this story about how I was born with brown eyes. I was in my room coloring when I was about 4 years old. And that box that we all have that you throw your crayons into? Like, for me, it was a cigar box, but everyone has a different version of this box, that you have your broken crayons and the peeled ones and the perfect ones. I reached into that box and I pulled out a green crayon, and it didn't smell like anything, but I took a nibble and the texture was almost like chewing gum, and I liked it. So I ate it and I liked it. So I ate another green crayon and another until all the green crayons in the box were gone. And I woke up the next day and my left eye was green. And so I tell that, and then I always pause and I wait, and I get a lot of like sideways looks and arched eyebrows. And you can tell that no matter who I'm telling it to, children or adults, they're trying to reconcile, like, is she for real? Is she?
Yeah.
Or like, logic says, no, that's not true. Her eyes didn't change color because of a crayon, but she said it so straight that I'm not really sure. And I would let them off the hook and say that, of course, that's not how my eyes changed colors. But this shift happened because it went from me being this weird, different thing that everyone is treating like a sideshow to now this moment of connection.
Mm-hmm.
And they would generally start laughing about the questions they had been asking me, and we'd have a different conversation and almost a start of a relationship that we probably wouldn't have had otherwise. In fact, I've had people tell me decades later that they think of me when they see crayons. And that moment showed me that stories are this exchange of energy, and they're a way to create a shift in energy where you need it. And so as I moved into my professional career and was in positions where I was a head of culture and a business of 90,000 employees in 150 countries, or heading up leadership development and these really large scale businesses, I was trying to persuade people that had the budget for investment for development or technology or different things. And maybe one person had the ability to say yes, but 99 could say no. And they sure wanted to say no. And I found stories were a way to connect to all of them, particularly those 99, slow those no's and get them, in fact, on my side to have them help influence the decision makers. And so I recognized, we think of stories to start meetings or presentations. Maybe we think of stories for a toast, but they're really these dynamic ways to communicate, to shift energy, to create a connection, to build rapport, to broaden thinking. And so it's something that I just continually have used in fun ways, in human ways, but also ways to try to create different change.
Well, that's so powerful. And what I'm picking up from what you're sharing is the difference between others telling or trying to make up a story about you, and when you use up the space and tell your own story, just how that's where the connection can happen.
100%.
Yeah, because when they're trying to figure you out and telling your story, there's this disconnection that's happening because they're probably not getting it right. But you having the willingness to be vulnerable, to step into that space, you didn't shrink back despite however you were feeling, but you stepped into using humor
Sarcasm, but we'll call it
and wit.
humor.
Yes. But still being vulnerable and stepping into that and creating that connection is so powerful. And all the other things that you said about that being critical for creating influence and moving people to action. And we all need that, no matter where we are and sit in life and society or in an organization. We're all looking for ways to communicate, influence, and shift and reach out and make connections with others. So I think you've definitely shown why it's so powerful and so important.
Well, and what you said is exactly key. If you aren't sharing the stories about you, people will form their own understanding in their brain and their mind. I encourage, like in a job interview, your goal in the job interview is to build that person's understanding of you in their mind. And you do that through the way you are intentional about telling stories. Same is true in just every interaction. Stories are not just communicating, it is understanding, and it's helping someone really get the understanding that you want. And that's not manipulative. That is, we are all going to filter our own experiences, our own bias through these things. And what you're trying to do is help someone say, help someone recognize this is who I am, and not leave it up to them to do and potentially have bias come in there.
Well, I'm glad you brought up manipulation. What is that line, especially when you're telling stories that you've thought about, planned, you're thinking about your audience and you're thinking about the outcome that you want to have? What's the line between that being, and you're trying to, tug on heartstrings maybe, and you have an intention with the story. What's the line between wanting to have these genuine connections and being authentic and people either feeling manipulated or you feeling like you're manipulating people?
The thought that just because you're sharing a story you're manipulating, I think, is misguided, because we are communicating all the time with some outcome that we want. And maybe that outcome is for someone to make a decision or take action or to change an idea or to experience an emotion, but we generally are communicating for a reason. And the same is true for stories. So just because you're sharing a story, you're not manipulative. Just because you're sharing a story that maybe does target the heartstrings, you're not manipulative. In the US, there were these commercials for the American Society for Prevention and Cruel Treatment for Animals, the ASPCA. And this is the camera panning over a cage of a trembling puppy or kitten that, has all sorts of gook in its
I can
eyes.
literally see it right now.
Yeah, and they're trembling and you can barely watch because it just feels so painful, and this gut-wrenching ballad is playing over it, and it's almost impossible to watch. However, I don't believe those commercials are manipulative because they are transparent about what they're trying to do, which is raise awareness for the prevention of cruel treatment to animals and raise funding. And so, are they leaning into your emotions hard? Yes. Are they manipulating? No. To me, manipulation comes when you are intentionally withholding information or shaping narratives in a way that you are manipulating that information. So we have all probably experienced someone in journalism or politics or something that we believe has withheld or shaped information in a way that was meant to manipulate a message. And right away, our detection systems go off and we think, that is not true. That feels like I'm being manipulated. We sense it, and then we don't trust them anymore. And so the key to not manipulating is to be transparent about what you're communicating, why you're communicating it, what you know, what you don't know, and not intentionally withhold or insert information as a propaganda to try to get to an outcome. But it's more you're guiding people through what you understand and know. That manipulation comes in when that changing or withholding of information happens or that lack of transparency is there.
Thank you for that clarity, because I think that that's been murky for me, and I like how you said it leaning hard into your emotions is not manipulation, and for giving us that very clear distinction and definition of what that is. Because I think that even as a listener, it helps to be armed with that knowledge and that realization to know that you can be more open to the puppies, because you're like, okay, I'm not being manipulated. They're leaning to my emotions, but this is not something that I have to resist, but maybe just think about versus other things that I have to be mindful of, like what information is being withheld here. So I like that. I feel armed now with real information. Though.
Right.
Yeah.
No, you can argue that commercial's not playing fair. Like, come on, you're bringing out the puppies and the kittens. That's not fair. Why don't you throw a baby in there too and just do us all in, right? But it's not like they are withholding. Like, it's very clear what they're trying to do. Where it's different is if they maybe put a bunch of stats up about the treatment of animals and didn't, I'd have to think through what a more specific example would be, but it always comes down to transparency and what you're trying to do and how you are guiding people through that.
So, those who listen to this podcast are mostly professionals in work. Some people have side hustles. Some people are looking to be entrepreneurs, but most folks are still full time in work. And so, this conversation around storytelling in the workplace is very relevant because, people are navigating their work experiences. And so, that's why I asked that question about what about the people who feel like, they don't have stories to tell. And thank you for your answer. So what do people need to know and be mindful of, and what pitfalls do they need to avoid as they're thinking about starting to maybe craft some stories and some settings that they might want to, bring up stories for the connections that they want to build and the ways that they want to present themselves, whether it's through a job interview or just in their role?
Let's talk about story ideas and the audience. But let's start with story ideas. Finding ideas for a story requires embracing the fact that you were very close to your own experiences and ideas. And because of that, we naturally kind of downplay them and think, oh, that's not interesting. No one would want to know that. When in reality, it's not true. How often have you been in conversation with a friend or a coworker and they start sharing something and you are fascinated and it never would have occurred to them to share it? So I think starting to collect ideas without knowing when you're going to use them, where you're going to use them, maybe even how you're going to use them is key. Because when you start collecting potential ideas for stories before you ever need them, your brain is more relaxed. If you're doing it 5 minutes before a meeting when you're trying to tell a story, your brain is going to be feeling the anticipation. You probably have a little bit of adrenaline or maybe cortisol flowing in your body. And that is going to narrow your focus and make it much harder for you to have free thinking. So first thing is have a place to put ideas Maybe that's an app, a spreadsheet, a notebook, whatever works for you, but have a dedicated place and sit down and start working through your experiences. Think of all those questions you answer in a job interview, like your best team, a time you experienced conflict, advice someone gave you, and start mining your experiences. And what you want to do is think like, okay, what is the best advice I've received? And you would jot down maybe the line of advice or the name of the person that gave it to you or something. You're not writing down the full story. You're writing down the idea, because later, when it is time to tell a story, you want to be able to scan this list and see which one of them can help you build the outcome you want. So start with your professional experiences. Go to your personal life. Think of things like, what is something you should have gotten rid of years ago, but you just can't get rid of? Each of these little things might not seem like a story now, but you put them on the page and they become ideas. They become ideas that could become stories. They become ideas that could prompt new ideas when you're scanning them. As you move through the world and you watch a documentary that you love, you read an article that fascinates you, or a book or a podcast, what you want to do is notice those things that are interesting and intriguing and start this list and move through different aspects of your life. And what you're really doing is putting constraints in place so that you can think deeply in specific areas of work experience, of personal experience, of things that fascinate you, to create this list that when it's time, you will come back to and use to choose an idea. So that's the idea part. The audience part is that every time you tell a story, it begins with the audience. It doesn't begin with the story. It doesn't begin with the idea. You always want to ground yourself in, who am I talking to? What is it that I want this audience to experience? I mean, even if you're telling a story that you've told before, you still want to think about this audience, because you want to make sure you're telling it in a way that's going to be meaningful. So to do that, you want to think about, what is it that I want them to know or to think or feel differently? So let's go internal first, right? What are the things that I want them to come away from this thinking or feeling as a result of this story? The second question, and you would write out a sentence for that just to ground yourself. The second sentence would be, what is it that I want them to know or do as a result of this story? Then you would write a third sentence for, where is their mindset today on this? And the fourth one would be, what might be an obstacle? So this is a basic communication mapping that you can use this 5 minutes before a meeting, or 5 weeks before. What you're really trying to do is picture, who is it that I'm speaking to and where am I trying to get them to, internally in terms of what they're thinking and feeling, externally in terms of what they're actually going to know and do as a result of it, and then any challenges. And the reason you want to start there is because when you have that clarity of what you want them to know, think, feel, or do, you can now go back to that list of ideas that you started and ask yourself, which one of these will help me? So let's say you wanted to help a group of people embrace trust on a team. Maybe you're talking to a team that's struggling with trust. So you would go back to that list of ideas and ask yourself, which one of these will help me build the ideas that I want around trust? Can I do that with this? And as you move through the list, it's going to become really clear which ones can do that and help reinforce that, and which ones can't, or it's going to trigger a whole new idea that might be meaningful.
So you're doing a matching exercise, but I like how it starts out with you needing to be much more observant of your life and just constantly aware and taking note and jotting down what's going on for the idea building piece. What are these moments that you're running into, conversations that you're having, anything that's sort of sparking your mind and your thought as you're going through your life and through the day? And there's no pressure on that. Like if you're doing the story idea banking right ahead of time. And then I love this thinking about the audience also specifically, because I think that that's something that I don't necessarily think about intentionally ahead of time. I sort of have the story fully fleshed out and then you're like, does it fit this audience? But like you thinking about the audience before you go deeper into the story crafting to sort of make sure that you're developing something that's really going to get people to think. What did you say? Think, feel, and do
Know, think, feel, do.
Know, think, and feel, and do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the key for all of it is you are trying to notice those things you feel energy toward.
Mm.
You want to be picking an idea that you are intrigued or excited by, or maybe have grappled with and come through the other side. It shouldn't be something you dread. By the way, these could be other people's stories too. I do have a TED talk that I tell stories about other people in it. It's not important that it's about you. It's about the things that you notice and you have energy toward, because a story is an exchange of energy. And when you have that, that's going to come through in the story that you built.
What about when you're having difficult conversations? Is that the time to bust out a story?
Yeah, absolutely. I do work with mediators. Mediators by nature are meant to be impartial. They are there truly to mediate an outcome. They are not to give favor to either party, but they are there helping people mediate and negotiate very difficult things, from businesses to relationships that are unwinding or being divided. There are moments where there's a stalemate, or there is frustration, or there is deeply felt emotions from years and years of whatever, resentment, challenges, problems. And they sometimes need a story just to shift the energy, or to break the tension, or to have both parties feel like, okay, we're in good hands here. This is okay. Or even to hear a story about what someone else has experienced, so that you can have hope. In mediation, this can go many, many days. And people are trying to decide, do I accept this, or do I keep going? What do I do? And while the mediator isn't there to tell them what to do, they can share some stories that might help the people think through or become unstuck. It's not like situation specific of, is there a time not to tell stories? There's only one time I think you shouldn't tell stories. And that is typically in the business world. The thing that is happening right now is very much around, are people going to return working into an office, or are they going to be working virtually, or there's policy changes about, vacation, and are we going to do all paid time off, unlimited paid time off, or restricted, all these different things. And companies will come and say, like, what story should I tell to let employees know we're going to be going back into the office? And I'm like, do not tell a story.
Yeah.
Do not tell one.
Mm.
Treat people like adults, because no one wants to be on the receiving end of something that they then feel is being manipulative. So that's the only time you don't want to tell a story of, if there is a decision, a policy, a regulation, it just is, communicate that and treat people like adults and share that. But when there's a need for a shift in energy, or a navigating change, or a coachable moment, or a really difficult conversation, or someone that is just feeling shame or embarrassment or a failure, like, all of those are amazing moments. Think of it like, if you are stacking logs to build a fire, the story is the oxygen between, it's the air between the logs that can give it space and oxygen.
So no story if you're just delivering matter of fact information that needs to be delivered, and story is more appropriate when there's more, I guess, complex human relationships that are involved. There's change, there's things to overcome, or anything like that. That's when stories are probably much more useful and much more effective and powerful in those settings.
Yeah, great summary.
So Reframe to Create is about shifting the narrative around work and how we work. I'm helping professionals think about how they can create with their gifts more consistently and be mission minded, not just job focused, figuring out how to get paid to be themselves by liberating their work from a single employer, and figuring out how the things, their strengths and what they have to offer to the world, can bring them income and bring them opportunities from multiple spaces and multiple directions. It's a different way of thinking about and looking at work. And I know that I and others get stuck really because of the stories that we tell about ourselves, the stories that we tell about what's possible, so many different things. If the most important stories really are the stories that we're telling ourselves, how can becoming better storytellers help us to tell stories that are really going to support us and move us and propel us forward when we're, I guess in this case, we're the audience, not someone else outside?
Yeah, I think two ways. And the first might seem a little odd. I am one of these people that spent 20 years in a corporate career on the side of the desk that was making decisions and running projects in large parts of the organization. And I would work with different vendors and people, and I would think, well, gosh, I could do that better. I feel like there's so many more interesting, more dynamic things we could do. And as I reached the point where I wanted to step into doing this fully for myself, a lot of those questions came up. The first thing I think is make a list of all of those fears, all of them. Some of mine were healthcare. If you aren't on a employer healthcare, then what does that look like? Or how am I planning variable income? And so a lot of them for me were tied to money in different ways. And so I really made a list of them and looked at them and thought, what are those things I'm afraid of? And many of them had very actionable steps I could take. Healthcare, many phone calls you can make to figure out what do you do for a plan and what works for you and how do you get the coverage that you want. And I found once I did that, this thing that had been looming as this big fear and this weight and burden was nothing. But until I was able to look at it and confront it, I didn't know. Same for income. So I try to notice those things that feel heavy or concerning or that are just taking up more real estate in my mind than they should be, and get really clear on what they are, and then see, are there facts I can gather? Because facts are a way to, or information, let's say that we can get, that I could gather. Because without that, you do risk this narrative and the story playing out that is, but what if, or, this constant fear loop. And so to me, that's the first part. The second part is then reframing, what does it look like if it worked out? What does it look like if we did this? So when I stepped out to open my business, I sat down and I started to work on my website and my services. And I realized I was writing down a lot of stuff I was great at, but I did not want to do. And so I stopped and I thought, like, what is your perfect day? And what do you want to be doing? And what types of things do you want to be helping people on? And what does that look like? And so I find when you put those two together, you come up concretely with the list of fears. You try to see what steps you can take to understand or better support information that would help address the fears. And then you look at what would it look like if this worked out. It becomes easier. I have goals, I have growth, I have all of those things that you should be having in a business, but I'm also not too tied to them because I have found that this is my 5th year. Every quarter, the business has evolved in some way. And so I feel like you're looking through the lens of a camera and you are focusing that aperture tighter and tighter each time as you move forward, and you realize some of these fears aren't true. And here are some things I really love, and here are bright spots, and you make adjustments and you go. And so I think the combination of all of those things can help you recognize you are never going to be ready and have everything perfect, right? I'm not a parent, but as my friends have described to me, you were never ready to be a parent. You might have a nursery decorated and you might have all the supplies, but then you're handed this person, and holy moly, I am not prepared. And I think that's true for anything. And so it's getting enough scaffolding so you can move forward.
What advice would you have given yourself in your early years, looking back with everything that you know now, that you think would have helped move you along, or that you think has made it successful, or things that you would have wanted to avoid?
I don't know that there were things to avoid because there's, every experience leads you to where you are.
Mm-hmm.
There certainly have been realizations and bumps and maybe clients that weren't right for me or things I gave energy to that I didn't need to. I think the thing that I focus on the most now is really matching energy. So who are those ideal clients that it feels right to give into? And who are those relationships that it's not just a one-way constant energy drain? Like the biggest lesson I've learned in my business is watching my energy and where I have energy to give and what I can give it to and what I can't, because you get a lot of requests for things that you just don't have capacity to do. And so I think if I could have figured that out sooner, that probably would be better. But that's certainly something I continue to pay attention to. But, I pay attention to it because I also went through it.
Yeah, and that's a life skill. That's a maturity skill, and not just in business, but on all of life. And that's something that I'm also learning. And I think that's youth not really paying as much attention to how you're feeling in something, or if there's a mutual exchange or what's going on, but to just sort of like be out there. I call it my pixie dust days, when I used to float around and just throw my feelings and pixie dust on everything else and not pay attention to, is it coming back? Are you in the right space and setting, whether it's personal or whether it's work? So I think that's a powerful lesson to be mindful of in work, business, in life, all of life, to be more mindful of that. What have I not asked you?
Because I recently published The Perfect Story, I get asked a lot of questions about storytelling and different tactics around storytelling and what makes a great story and what are common mistakes. I'm not asked what is hard about storytelling for me. And I think that's important because I have days where I struggle putting a story together. I have a regular blog and I try really hard in that to use a story and provide meaningful tools, and was working on one this week, and I went through 4 different stories, 4 different topics, couldn't land. Like, I knew who the audience was, but I couldn't land on an idea, and I had to walk away because the more things happening, the more stress we're under, right? The creative thinking is harder. And I started to recognize I was forcing it. And that recognition alone is important. And so stepping away when it feels really hard is a good thing to do. I will have days where I will put the most basic wrote common story together and I'm like, oh, this is terrible. Okay, now I've got to work the process, just like I tell everybody, of how do I make this more dynamic. But if I haven't slept and I haven't left myself enough time and I'm trying to get this done in the next 30 minutes and the next thing is happening, it's really hard for my brain to keep thinking for all the things that I tell people too. And so all of the things that I talk about are things that I use regularly because I recognize you're not going to tell the most perfect story the first time. It's going to take iterations for you to figure out for the audience what is needed and how to do it and how to work through it. And I feel like that's important to share because I will hear people say, oh, but it's really easy for you. You can tell a story. I'm like, no, I struggle just like you do in different days. I just use tools to take me through those. I first try to use awareness to recognize when I'm not getting it. And then I use tools to try to move through that and just not stay stuck.
Oh, that's so helpful, because I know we can get stuck in they're the expert, and that's why it's easy for them. But thank you for sharing the struggle and the challenges there, and the fact that you use your tools. And so it would behoove us as well to use them to get over our humps as well. That's great. Has there been a time you shared a story that it just totally did not land?
Oh, absolutely. It'll happen again too. Absolutely. So I do my best thinking and writing. I am an introvert and that processing very much is a part of it. I can tell a story in the moment. I have, and because I've done this so much innately, I think have come up with patterns. But there are times where I'm creating something and writing and I've thought through the audience and I have so much excitement for it. And it just doesn't go the way I think it's going to go, because sometimes you can express in writing the way you communicate a story in writing is not the way you tell it live. The way you tell a story live isn't the way you tell it in writing, and it can take some time to translate those things. Or this is something we all struggle with. There's a reason why you want to tell the story. You can see so clearly what you want to pass on to someone, but you haven't found the right pieces to connect other people to it so they have that same understanding. Just because you want them to experience it doesn't mean they will. We have to do that work. When my stories tank, I haven't done that. And sometimes you feel it in the moment and you're like, oh, this is not going the way I wanted it to. And that's okay. You learn, you move on, you try to see how to evolve it and how to make the story better. I think of it as there are comedians that tell jokes that are fantastic and hilarious, and we are bent over wiping tears because they're so amazing. But that same comedian 2 minutes before also told a joke that kind of fell flat. And what do? They turn to the audience and like, really? Nothing? Okay, we'll scratch that one, and they move on. And
Yeah.
you don't go home repeating the joke that they didn't land. You were talking about the ones they did. And so the same is true. You will tell stories that won't work the way you want them to, and that's okay. It's very much part of the process, and it's what you learn from it and how you go forward.
I see this as an invitation to be human, to connect, to participate, to try, there's a metaphor and analogy that when I was doing the public narrative coach training course that we talk about all the time, and it's getting on the bike. You don't learn how to ride a bike by reading the manual. You get on the bike and you fall off the bike and you get back on again, and you keep going until it becomes second nature to you. Storytelling to me is that way. It's an important rite of passage, like riding a bike. Hopefully you don't leave childhood without it, but it's an important rite of passage for not just leadership in an organization, but anybody in any role. If you want to be connecting, if you want to influence, or just have good relationships and be a good team member. But it requires some intentionality, thinking about it, and some practice. And there are tools out there that can help us to do it and be better at it. Not because we just want to like feel better about ourselves, but we really want to connect and really think about those who are listening to what we're sharing, so that we can have that shift in energy as you shared and make those connections.
And I want to touch on one thing, because the moment comes where it is time to tell the story, and that lump in your throat has grown from a golf ball now to a softball. And you're like, I don't want to get up and do this. There is vulnerability. It feels intimidating. And it makes me think of when I was a young, maybe teenager, we were at an amusement park with my family, and they had just opened this ride where you dangled from the track. You weren't sitting in a cart on top of it, but you were underneath the track, first of its kind, right? So you're strapped in, but you're dangling freely. And I stood at the ground and I looked at this thing. It was called the Big Bad Wolf. And I looked at it and I was like, So I'm not afraid of roller coasters, but I'm not like, yay, this is amazing. Let's go. I work up the nerve, though, to get on this, and you're on the ride, and my hands were holding the shoulder harness so tight that my knuckles are white. And you start going up the incline for that first drop, right? And it's like clank, 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 clank. And I'm just thinking, like, why am I doing this? This is crazy. Why am I doing this? I don't enjoy this. Who said we should do this? And you get to the top and you have that hover for 1 second right before the drop. And I was just like, oh no. And then the drop happens. And then I'm squealing with laughter because the ride was so much fun. And all of that anticipation for the drop and going on it, and all of that was replaced with joy. And you get to the end of the ride after flipping upside down and twisting and turning. You lurch to a halt. And the first thought I had was, let's go again. Mm-hmm. And it's the same thing when you are telling a story. It is so common to feel that apprehension or nervousness or anticipation, and that's okay. But the way through it, the way to experience the other side, is to tell the story. And there's no way around that, because once you do and you see the response that you get from people when they have connected, when they have had that shared experience, you're going to immediately think, let's go again.
I hope that's how you feel when you finally try your hand at telling your story. After the initial fears, I hope you come to not just see its value, but love it. And then I hope you go again and again. Because what I've learned from telling my own stories and helping others to tell theirs is that this is a practice. This is something you have to get at and keep doing. You never hit perfection, and you never have to. But you can tell a story that's perfectly timed and perfectly placed for the people who need to hear it from you. If you're still wondering why this is so important and how it's, connected to you, let me break it down again in our context. You know that here at Reframe to Create, it's all about discovering your gifts and then learning to create with your gifts so that you can make a unique contribution and get paid to be yourself. But your gift isn't going anywhere on its own. It's not marketable if you don't know how to tell its story and your story along with it. Stories are how people connect to you and what you have to offer. And whether you're trying to share this in your work or personal life, storytelling is a powerful and important skill for you to develop so that you can do this. As Karen said, stories aren't just a way to communicate. They're a way for people to understand and connect with you. So whether you're going on a job interview, working on a promotion, pitching an entrepreneurial idea, helping your team navigate a difficult change, or building a movement, connecting and being understood is something you want and need. Karen's book, The Perfect Story, is a great resource where you can get even more of her great storytelling tips than the ones we discussed today. And learn more about her and her work at KarenEber.com. And this reminds me of something. I recently took a senior leadership team through a session on storytelling by teaching them the public narrative model. And the public narrative model is a leadership storytelling and action model for storytelling and moving people to action by raising their sense of agency and hope through 3 stories: the story of self, the story of us, and the story of now. And through this process of taking this leadership team through the model, something came to the surface again, as it always does whenever I'm engaged with the public narrative model, and that is values. Storytelling is a powerful way to reveal and connect to others based on your values. And being able to share and connect based on your values is one of the most powerful and moving things that you can do. Maybe you've gotten through this episode and felt like, yeah, okay, all very interesting. And, I'd love to connect more in work and life so that I can share who I am and share my values, but I don't know how to go about this. I don't know where to start. Don't worry. I don't just help professionals like you discover their gifts and create with them. I also help them to unearth and craft their stories. And it's one of my absolute favorite things to do. And I think these 2 things go hand in hand, creating and storytelling. The things that we create and being able to tell the story of what those things are, and how the things that we create really are the story of who we are and what we have to contribute in the world. So I see them interconnect in so many ways. So if you want some help and support in really diving into this work of storytelling and flexing that muscle, visit reframetocreate.com. Smash the big purple Let's Connect button that you see there and schedule a call with me to see what storytelling package will work for you. See you soon, Creating Maven. Until then, remember to always ask yourself, what will I create?